I'm getting this channel off the ground. I've had other YouTube channels, but this is the first one I've actually kind of think I'm going to dedicate to gaming, which is something that I've been doing almost all my life. I'm 33 years old now, and when I think about gaming, a lot comes to mind. And I've been looking at some other people's channels and seeing what they do, and be just looking for some inspiration. And it kind of got me thinking about my whole history with gaming, and I thought it might be interesting to kind of go through my gaming history as a 33-year-old guy and reflect on some of the memories I have, and how things have kind of changed in the industry and in gaming over the years that I've been involved in it. So at first I was going to start with kind of my first into PC gaming, because I tend to be more of a PC gamer. But then I really thought, I should go back to really my first interactions that I've had with computer games, with video games in general. So the first time that I ever had any type of an interaction with a video game would have been with an Atari system in the early 80s. And I believe that my older sister had an Atari. I don't remember the model number of it. And the only game I can really recall playing from it very much would be Pitfall, which, if you never played it, it's kind of like a Indiana Jones type game, very simple, where you run across the screen and you jump across these ponds that have alligators in it to try to get to the other side. It's a 2D side scroller, and I think they've actually made some modern games as like sequels to Pitfall. Now, after the Atari, I remember my next door neighbor getting the Nintendo, the original Nintendo system, and that thing pretty much blew me away. Mario Brothers, the classic Mario Brothers Duck Hunt game being the first one I ever played, and pretty soon I was showing up at the next door's neighbor's house at like 6:30, 7 in the morning before school would start. And his parents didn't appreciate that too much, but we definitely had a fun time playing the good old Nintendo. And at the time, that thing really blew me away, because I'd never really seen anything like that before. I mean, I played some games in arcades and stuff like that, but I never really experienced anything like that Nintendo system. My parents saw how much I liked it, and for Christmas, I got my very own Nintendo Entertainment System and my very own subscription to Nintendo Power magazine. So I was pretty firmly in the Nintendo camp. I know a lot of people talk about kind of the Sega versus Nintendo wars. I really didn't know too much about Sega. I kind of just knew of Nintendo, and Sega was something I kind of heard about before, or heard about it at school a couple times, but really there wasn't this kind of grand debate about it. For the most part, me and any of the friends I had who played any kind of games, we played them on Nintendo. Now, the first games I can remember having for Nintendo were, of course, Mario Brothers, but I remember I had the Metal Gear game that was the first one for Nintendo, and I had Final Fantasy, the first one. And the Metal Gear game was actually too hard for me at the time. I couldn't... I don't, in retrospect, looking back at that game, I don't think it was very well done, but I actually really didn't like that game. I ended up returning it and getting Spy Hunter, which was a not very good game in retrospect, but it was something I could actually play at the time. And Final Fantasy was probably really, the first one was my introduction to role-playing games, and, kind of taking that Dungeons and Dragons experience and putting it on a computer. And I really liked Final Fantasy. Me and my friends, it pretty much took us a whole summer to get through it. There really wasn't accessibility to the internet back then. So if you got stuck somewhere or didn't know something, you had to figure it out yourself. And these games were not very forgiving. A lot of games, it didn't have save functions. And if you were on your last life and fighting a boss and you didn't have any continues left, you could very well look at having to start the game over again. Contra was very popular in our house as a game. Had a lot of fun with Contra, using the cheat code for it. I remember playing R-Type. I remember renting a lot of games from the local video store, which local video stores are something I miss. There was something cool about going into video stores and putting your hands on all the movies and then the boxes and seeing the art and renting movies or games and then bringing them back. It was I liked the experience. We used to have a video store near where we lived called Escape Video that would let you rent 5 movies or 5 games for 5 days for $5. And I used to very heavily take advantage of that. I pretty much every week would spend $5 a week to have either a couple games and a few movies, and really relished going into that place. I remember they had a mural on the side of the building that was all the Disney characters, and I kind of miss that. I mean, I know that with Netflix and Pirate Bay and stuff like that, you definitely have an immediacy of access. You can pretty much get whatever you want with a click, which is great. But there's also something to be said for limiting your choices and, maybe having access to a video store that had some more of the obscure types of films that you can't find everywhere, and maybe you found something really cool that nobody else could find. So, back to games. Soon after that, we actually had a Apple IIe, and the Apple IIe, if anybody's ever operated on one, had a very basic operating system, and you would load, now not just floppy disks, but the large 5-inch disks into the machine. And I remember my first actual computer game was my mom went to a yard sale and got me a book that had computer games in it. It was actually literally programming code. You would load up the base operating system of the IIe, and you would type in, a couple pages of programming, and you'd have a game. Some of the games were very basic. Some of the games were a little more complex and had graphics, but that experience there definitely taught me a lot about computer programming, definitely taught me a lot about, or gave me a lot of skills with typing and inputting data into a computer. And really, that was a pretty invaluable experience. We also had, for the IIe, we had a Jeopardy game. We had, we had Jeopardy. We had Who Framed Roger Rabbit. No, not Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? And we had a flight simulator, a very old school flight simulator game. And I remember I played the Jeopardy game so much, because back then, a game like that didn't have that many questions and answers. I actually played the Jeopardy game so much that I had all the questions and answers memorized, and I have people come over and I'd make them think that I was, some kind of genius, because I would know the answer to every question almost immediately. I remember doing that to people. From there, I'm going to kind of move past the Nintendo to the Super Nintendo. I remember my grandmother actually owned a flea market, and I actually sold my Nintendo and Super Nintendo, my Nintendo and the games that I had with it at the flea market in order to afford the Super Nintendo. And the Super Nintendo was a pretty big step up. I remember I had some of the odder games like Mario Paint and Mario Paint. I remember you would sit there and paint things, and you can make movies with it. There was also some kind of music program. I forget what the name was, but it was like a music thing where you could make music on the Super Nintendo. And some of my favorite games for that system were F-Zero, the Mario Brothers games. I'm trying to remember. There was a game called Final Fantasy Mystic Quest that I actually really enjoyed. In retrospect, it wasn't that hard of a game, but I thought it was a pretty good game. And from there, I ended up soon after that with my first computer, which was a Compaq with a Pentium 1 processor and I think 16 megabytes of RAM. But yeah, that's where I'm going to stop this video at, because that's where my computer gaming picks up. That was really my first introduction to a computer that could get onto the internet. First, I believe we had AOL, and getting into AOL I remember they used to have these chat rooms called Juarez chat rooms, or Juarez. I'm not sure if how you say it exactly. And you could get games. I remember pirating the first one. I think it was the first Grand Theft Auto game, which was like a 2D or overhead scroller game. And you would actually, there was a file limit on attachments that people could send to you through AOL. So people would take zipped files and break them into, I think it was like 3 megabyte attachments, and forward you a email that had a ton of forwards attached to it, and each one was a different file in the zip file, and you'd have to download all the separate zip files and then open the one file, which would queue all the other ones. But you could get software that way, and it was painfully slow. This was around the time where you first started hearing about MP3s and music being online. And I remember back then with dial-up internet, it was if somebody had a lot of songs on their computer, it was a pretty cool thing. It meant that they had put a good amount of work into it. I think it was around probably 15 minutes to 20 minutes per song. And I mean, back then, not everybody had these cell phones. So in order for, and this kind of has to do with the culture of the internet. Back then, and before that, the type of people that you'd find online were mostly, tech-savvy, computer geeky type people. There was a certain kind of naivete to it, I guess. Because for the most part, people who wanted to get online, if they were younger especially, not many people in the house had cell phones. So you had to take the phone line for the house and plug it into the computer and occupy it. So the rest of the house couldn't use the phone most of the time if you were on the internet. And most people didn't have multiple phone lines or a dedicated phone line for the internet. So, being online meant that your family wasn't using the phone at that moment. Now, the first game that I think I ever saw on my modern computer, I remember it being a big deal about Myst, and this was about the time that the first CD-ROMs came out. And I remember Myst being this, oh my God, look at this game, because what they had done is taken high resolution pictures for the time, and made it so you could move around in those environments, and so it was phenomenal to somebody who had been used to seeing stuff like Nintendo and Super Nintendo and things of that nature. These games that were starting to come out in CD-ROMs that could hold more information were revolutionary. Now, the really big one was Doom. I remember back then you could get this thing called shareware, and you could get like a free demo copy of the game Doom. And that game really started it off for me. It was dark, and it definitely had an atmosphere to it. There was online components for it, although I didn't really play the online components for Doom very much. But with Doom, kind of came an influx of games like that, like Duke Nukem 3D. I remember there was like a ninja game that was like that. I forget the name of it. And Duke Nukem 3D was actually the game me and my friends played a lot. Really liked the game. Didn't really get all the They Live references at that time of my life. Hadn't seen that movie yet. But when I saw it, I was like, oh, wow. That's a really cool movie. And the references to Duke Nukem, or references in Duke Nukem to They Live, are definitely there. If you haven't seen the movie They Live, it's a classic, a John Carpenter movie from the 80s. You gotta go see it. You definitely need to see that movie. So, back in the day, to play these games online, you literally had to have one person set up their computer on the receiving end, meaning that their phone line would pick up and wait for a call on their computer's modem, and the other person would type a phone number into the game, and it would call that person's house computer, and it would connect the two machines together, and you could play against each other. But most of the time we would play co-op, and that was a lot of fun. I tell you what, man, going through the vents and Doom and getting the weapons and going through the levels together, that was a ton of fun. After that was the original Quake, and with the original Quake, was the first time I had ever seen network gaming stores. We had one pop up in our area where people would go and play the original StarCraft or Quake. And that's really when the internet started, around the time where the internet and gaming started picking up too. The first online game that I ever played was a game called Subspace. The way I found it was I used to have a subscription to PC Gamer magazine. I'm probably 15 years old at this time. And they had a demo. You used to get this CD-ROM for PC Gamer magazine that would have all these demos of games on it. So the main reason a lot of people subscribed to the magazine was that you could get a bunch of games. Now back then the internet's still slow, so downloading games and occupying the phone line while you're downloading the game can be a big problem. Or if you get disconnected and you're not using a download service that saves the download, then let's say it's a 7-hour download and you're 5 hours into it and somebody picks up the phone, now you don't have the game. So downloading large files back then wasn't really very practical. Later on, they made some file downloading programs that made it so if your download got interrupted, you could pause it and then resume it. But back then, for the most part, it was an all or nothing deal. You were downloading a file, like somebody called and it kicked over the wrong way, or somebody picked up the phone at your house, or something happened and you got some static on the line, and you've lost that file. And meanwhile, while you're downloading that file, you really can't do anything else online. You have to, that's it. Your pipe is full. So, first game online, get this game called Subspace. It advertises itself as an online game. I log in to play it, and lo and behold, it was the first time that I had got to play a game in a massive scale with other people. Before that, I had always liked arcades, like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game or some other games like Gauntlet, where you could play with other people. But I'd always thought, man, wouldn't it be cool if at an arcade you had the ability to have like one game there that was good, that everybody was linked together and playing together. And that's kind of what this was. And I had it not in an arcade, but at my house. And Subspace, if you never heard of it, which most people probably haven't, was a top-down asteroid-like game with Newtonian physics programmed into it, where you have a ship and you fly around and you shoot at other people. There's different kinds of ships. They have different kinds of zones or servers that you could log into. They have different objectives, like capture the flag, or they have a running zone or a chaos zone where it's just a free-for-all. And I really got into that game. The game was made by Virgin Interactive at the time. And I remember that the website for Virgin would take the top scorers and the top guilds for points every 2 weeks, which was a reset. They would call it a reset because every 2 weeks they would reset the scores and the zones. And the people with the highest scores would get their name posted on the site in kind of this like scrolling Java banner thing. And it was summer. I was 15 or 16 at the time. And there was 1 2-week period where I said, this is going to be my week that I get my name up there. And I literally sat in front of that damn computer for about 2 weeks straight playing this game. Non-stop, eyes bleeding, playing the game. And this was really one of the first times I got involved in an online community. I wasn't very liked by the online community. And I wasn't very nice to most of the people there. I was more of an antisocial personality on the server. But it was definitely an experience. I got really good at that game. Really good at it. And people actually still play it today. It's a pretty good game. It's one of the better games I've played. And, basically the idea of it was that you'd power up your ship by picking up these little power-ups. The more people you killed and the more power-ups you picked up, the more points you were worth, or your bounty. And when you would kill somebody, you would get the amount of points that they were worth. And so, you could always be incentivized to, see how many people you could kill without dying, or see how high you could get your bounty. Or some people would play the game and just go for people that had really high bounties, because they had a rating category for your stats that was based on, the number of people you killed and how many points they were worth. So there was like a winner for top rated kills every week. And The game had a guild system called squads, and you could make a banner, I think it was like a 8-bit JPEG image you could make as your banner that you could fly around next to your ship. Very cool game. Very cool game. That game, of course, led me to starting to go to Babbage's, which I don't think Babbage's exists anymore. But at the mall where we used to live, there was a computer store named Babbage's that sold computer games and computer equipment. And I remember the first online game that I saw in that store was a game called Meridian 59. And I did not buy it because my computer would not support it. But lo and behold, a few months later, I believe I got a newer computer. I think it was a Pentium 2. And I think I went to maybe 8 megabytes or 32 megabytes of RAM, I don't remember. And after getting that computer, I was able to play some of these newer games. Oh, and I also went and picked up what was it? It was an 8 megabyte 3DFX Voodoo video card, which I installed myself, which a lot of this stuff is actually what led me down the pathway to work in IT, which is what I do now. I definitely would not have gotten into IT if it wasn't for this lifelong obsession with games and computers and technology, which is a side note is why when people talk about they're worried about their kids playing games, maybe it's not like it was before, but when I was growing up, being interested in games and computer games and stuff like that was a in to being very interested in technology, and I think it definitely had a positive effect on my life. There were some negative effects too, mainly spending too much time inside, but I think the positives outweigh the negatives, and now that I have a career based on this hobby I used to have. So go in the store, I'm going to pick out a game, and there's another online game that's called Ultima Online. And I pick it up, and I take it home and install it on the computer. And little did I know that game was going to change my life. Log into this game, make a character. Never done that before in a game. Never designed my character and pick a name and what skills I want them to have. And all of a sudden I'm in this town. And there's people around me who are playing online with me. And just the thrill of realizing that I'm in a game with other people online who are here with me in this game was such a thrill. And the feeling of there were no quests or anything like that in this game. But just the idea that there's this world and what's out there and what am I going to explore. So I remember I didn't play it too much by myself, but eventually I told my friends about it. And I had a friend at the time named Daniel. And he ended up playing the game with me. And if you know anything about Ultima Online, it starts you off in a town called Britannia. And there's a little building up north of the main bank that everybody goes to. And me and him started hanging out there in the game. And we ended up meeting a guy named Mephisto who had a guild, which was something that we didn't have. And we started hanging out with this guy who could open up portals to other places in the world, and we'd go and kill some earth elementals or something like that. And, in the grand scheme of the game at the time, pretty newbie stuff, but to us it was amazing. It was amazing. We were getting to leave the town and fight these creatures and then come back, and yeah, it was pretty cool. Now, the first time that we tried to venture out of the town on our own wasn't as cool. I remember we ventured out of the town and came to this area, which we call the X Roads, which was an area that's near the limits of the safe area in the game. And pretty much as soon as we got out of the safe area, this guy named Alice Cooper, with this horrible looking mask on his character, runs up on a horse, starts saying these magical things over top of his head, and boom, you're dead. Now, keep in mind, in this game, when you died, everything that you're carrying on you falls on the ground. And people take it. So this was we had probably been playing the game maybe 2 or 3 weeks at this point. And everything that we had amassed in that time, we were pretty much carrying on us. And the person took it. It was gone. We resurrected back in town. We have a robe on. That's no armor or anything. And all our stuff, all our money, everything that we didn't have in the bank is gone. And What that experience did was the first thing that we did, of course, is we ran back out of town and tried to find this guy to talk to him because it was like, wow, this person definitely knows what's going on. Now, the guy had already left. But what that did was it created a sense of danger and it created a sense of risk and reward in our heads. We thought, wow, there's this evil, uber powerful guy who is able to run around and do all this crazy stuff. He took our stuff, and if we leave the town, we got to be really careful about what we do because somebody could just take all our stuff. Now, over my history of playing the game, the big breakthrough for me came when our house was able to get a cable modem. Once I got that, my gaming one, of course, changed dramatically, and I was able to, move around quickly in the game and things like that. Eventually, the story goes with that game that I actually ended up joining up with that guy later on in his guild and made a player killer and went and killed other people and looted them. And eventually, I got banned from that game. They had a mass wave of banning of accounts that were antisocial and the accounts that had player killers on it. Around the time that EverQuest came out, I think that they were worried about their game losing a lot of people, which it did. It did lose a lot of people to EverQuest. And a lot of people talk about Ultima Online and remember it fondly, which I do. But the thing about Ultima Online, I think the reason that it was so great and the reason that you're never going to have that again, or not that you're never going to have it again, but you're not going to have it again until there's a new technology. Because this was a fresh technology, and so all the people who were playing this game were, you had all the different groups of people. You had the role players, you had the crafters, you had the fanboys, you had the trolls, you had all of them, and the interactions between those people, those groups of people, is what made the game fun. Being a troll and getting to go and kill role players and watch them scream in the game about social injustice was priceless. And I think for those people too, it was. I think most of them would recall it probably actually fondly now that they've seen the alternative. Now, what happened from there was EverQuest came out, and EverQuest introduced this idea of questing and introduced this idea of not being completely friendly to players, but being a lot more friendly. EverQuest is still way harsher than most games are nowadays. In EverQuest, if you died, you lost experience. If you couldn't get back to your body, then you could potentially lose your items. And it had a tremendous grind that you had to be there for. In Ultima, you could actually AFK a lot of your grind, so to speak, by macroing it. EverQuest, not so much. Now, I kind of bounced around games after Ultima Online. I played Asheron's Call for a while on Darktide, which was a very fun experience. I didn't really get too into the scene there, but I've read a lot of stuff about the time and the people that played it, and definitely that game and that server specifically sounds like it had some very cool interactions. I played Dark Age of Camelot when it was out. That was a pretty fun game. The Realm vs. Realm combat was cool. I played on an open PvP server. Now, you didn't lose your items or anything like that, but that game was all about farming locations at the time I played it, meaning that you didn't really have quests, so you would go and find a group of monsters that were level appropriate, and you and friends would grind them to get your level up. And if another group came and kind of took your spot, you're kind of SOL. Now, these games and these games that were out at that time, what was cool, I think that what was neat about them was that the gaming industry was still small at that time, or relatively small. And the games that were being made were being catered to kind of people like me. People who had kind of grown up on Nintendo and Super Nintendo with very challenging games that were very cutthroat. The online games at first were very challenging, very cutthroat. And then what happened is the games started to kind of water themselves down to provide mass appeal. Now, MMOs specifically you could take a look at this very directly with Star Wars Galaxies. Now, Star Wars Galaxies was a very cutthroat, cool game. When it first came out, in order to become a Jedi, you had to basically. I'll explain the system. So, when Star Wars Galaxies came out, in order to become a Jedi, which was the most powerful character in the game, you had to unlock your Force training. So the game had a bunch of skills that you could level up. You could go and kill stuff, get experience, spend the experience to level up skills. And different sets of skills would, different people would consider them different types of classes. You had medics and combat medics, and that was just basically what people described a certain set of skills that you would take as, like, TK masters. And so when you created your account, I believe it was 7 of the skills were randomly flagged, that once you mastered those random 7 skills and you didn't know what they were, you would get a message saying that, that would lead you on this quest that would eventually lead you to unlock your Force training and become a Jedi. Now, the danger of this is that if you become a Jedi and you die a certain number of times, you're permanently dead and your character becomes like a blue glowy ghost that can talk and chat with people, but is not able to interact in the game world anymore with monsters or anything. Now, a lot of people might not like a system like that, but you don't have to become a Jedi, or you can make it alt and try to make it become a Jedi. But and this is something I harp about a lot, the idea that everyone is a special snowflake. If everyone's a special snowflake, then no one's a special snowflake. And I think that having a game where it's the people who play it a lot are rewarded for that, it seemed to work. Star Wars Galaxies was doing really well. It was the most popular MMO at the time. And if you ask a lot of people who played it, they loved it during that portion. Now, what happened is, and this is pretty much what's happened to gaming in general, is that World of Warcraft came out. Okay? Now, what World of Warcraft did was World of Warcraft took a intellectual product of Warcraft, which was pretty popular. Now, before World of Warcraft, Blizzard was known for Diablo. It was known for, I believe Diablo 2 came out before World of Warcraft, which we played. Blizzard was known for StarCraft. Blizzard was known for Warcraft 1 and 2. And I'm not sure which came out first, Warcraft 3 or WoW. I think Warcraft 3 came out before WoW, but I'm not completely sure. It might be very close. So they took the Warcraft kind of mythos with orcs and humans, and they made an MMO about it. They copied EverQuest in kind of the way that questing was going to be done, but simplified it a little bit. They designed a user interface that was pretty well done, pretty intuitive, but allowed people to make additions to the user interface with their coding. They make this game, and it becomes really popular really quick. In reaction to this, games like Star Wars Galaxy started to try to model their games more like World of Warcraft. So the problem with this was that they made it so that instead of having this hard path to become a Jedi, you could just log into the game one day, click on Jedi, and make a Jedi, and they got rid of the whole skill system and just made the game like a class-based thing, just like WoW. And the people who had spent this ridiculous amount of time becoming Jedis got a robe that was an appearance item. That's it. For their hard work. Not very cool. Not a very cool thing to do. And pretty much Star Wars Galaxies pretty much died after that. It's referred to as the NGE. It's what they call the new game enhancements. And pretty much killed the game. And there's currently emulator servers that emulate the older version of Star Wars. And now Star Wars is actually an MMO that's completely shut down. But let's talk about World of Warcraft. When World of Warcraft first came out, I was one of the people playing it. And a lot of people talk about Vanilla WoW and look back at it very positively. And I actually do too. Because one of the coolest experiences in Vanilla WoW was leveling your character up for the first time on a PvP server. Now, at this point, you didn't have corpse looting and you didn't have any of these other hardcore things that the old games had. but you had a lot of people, and you had a limited questing area, and you had a lot of fighting, and people fighting for areas, and a lot of open world PvP. At this time, there's no battlegrounds, there's no PvP gear, there's no resilience, there's no anything like that. And what happened was, I believe that what Blizzard ran into was even people on PvP servers not liking the idea of having too much open world conflict, having people being griefed, having people being prevented from doing quests, things like that. So I think that they kind of wanted to siphon PvPers off into their own area, where even if you're on a PvP server, people are going to consensually agree to PvP, and that's where Battlegrounds came from. And then once Battlegrounds were created, there's this need to create a gear system. And the gear system for WoW for PvP gear was pretty brutal at first. It was kind of like that game Subspace, where you had resets and the top people in terms of the amount of points gained at the end of a reset were ranked, and then they could buy the gear. And I think the top was Grand Marshal, followed by Field Marshal, followed by these other rankings. And each rank could get another piece of the gear in the chain. The gear didn't have any special stats on it yet, but it was comparable to some of the gear you could get from raiding. And I believe the weapon was actually a little better than what you could get from raiding, which pissed the PvEers off pretty bad. But what ended up happening with this system, I did a similar thing like in Subspace and sat down for a 2-week period and played way more than I should have and got Grand Marshal. What ended up happening here was, again, people didn't like this element of, being expected to play the game too much, so they kind of gave in and said, we'll give you these honor points, and then you can use these honor points to purchase PvP gear, and that's that. Now what's happened with WoW, and I really kind of don't like this, is this whole idea of arenas. And pretty much now, and I'm currently playing WoW, you can see my video here. In order for you to get the best gear in WoW for PvP, you pretty much have to do arenas. You can get, let's say you want to get a heavy piece of armor. It's 2,250 conquest points. If you do a random battleground, which takes about 10 minutes to get into a queue for, and then takes about 15 minutes to play, you can get, I think, 70 conquest points per match. Whereas a 2 versus 2 arena, you can get 180 points, and the average match time is like a minute or two. So, arenas, the reason I don't really like arenas is because there are certain intangible mechanics that you have in a game that you can take advantage of in a large battleground type fight that you can't take advantage of in a 2 versus 2 arena. For example, I have a hunter, and being able to stealth and get on a part of the map where people aren't paying attention and pop out and shoot somebody, and then, use the level, the field, or whatever to avoid people being able to come after you, is a major benefit to the hunter class, but it's not something you can really do in arenas as well. It's just that it seems that people are measured now in WoW by how they do in arenas, and intrinsically there are just certain things that happen in battlegrounds that will not happen in arenas, and I tend to like the larger group coordination. I mean, my favorite battleground used to be Alterac Valley, which was the 40 versus 41. I tend to like having larger groups and larger fights and more group coordination as opposed to now with arenas where it's all about understanding the cooldowns of an individual class and what to interrupt and what not to interrupt and when to use your ability and when not to use it, and who to target first or who to peel and all this other stuff. So that kind of moves you through WoW and where it's at now. The reason I'm playing WoW right now, I've actually played just about every MMO, but I have Archage, and I played the alpha for it for a while. I'm waiting for it to be released. I do like the game. I don't think I'm going to love the game, but I do like the game. In between that, I've played Runes of Magic. Runes of Magic was a pretty cool game, if anyone's ever played it. Well, Runes of Magic was a pretty cool game. The problem with Runes of Magic was it was cool. They had these, instead of having patches, they had these things called chapters. I came into the game at the end of Chapter 1, starting Chapter 2. And it was a pretty cool game. You would raid. There was no PvP gear. It was a PvP server. If you killed people, there was a chance they could drop a piece of gear. Very few people could do the raids on the server. So if you could do the raids and get the gear from the raids and then spend money in the cash shop to gear it up, you had a very big advantage. So you had, my character at the time on that server could, kill a group of 3 or 4 people who were my similar level, dude out gearing them. And I mean, a lot of people don't like to hear that and think it's kind of lame, but there's something to be said about being that guy in a game that can go around and kill a bunch of people. And more often than not, it got me more friends in the game and interacting with more people than being just a random cog in the wheel, so to speak, like in WoW, where not too many people know who the hell you are based on how you play or anything like that, or if it happens, it's rare. State of MMOs right now, I kind of look back at some of the games I've played and some of the games I've played recently. There's a lot of MMOs right now, and I think that the MMO genre is kind of taken it's kind of burned out, and I think that it's burned out because developers have gone and promised that we're going to recreate that experience that you've had in a game that you love, and we're going to recreate it for you. We're going to bring back that hardcore game or that PvP game or that open-ended sandbox type game. And the problem is that there's too much input from the communities now. And that people might wonder, like, well, what do you mean? Like, the greatest games that we ever played didn't really have a lot of input from communities. You had a person who was going to sit down and they were going to do what they wanted to do. They had a team and they would talk about it. But pretty much it was, a person or two really calling the shots. Now that you have these crowdfunded things and these, Kickstarter and Steam, Greenlight, and you have to kind of pander to the community, you kind of end up with this muddled project where it's getting pulled in all different directions by different people and with different agendas. And you kind of end up with these kind of muddled games nowadays. Darkfall was a game that everybody was talking about how revolutionary it was going to be and great, and the PvP was going to be so awesome. But the game ended up just not being very good, not being very playable. It didn't get the basics done right. It didn't get the basics of just being fun to play down right. Where is this stuff headed to now? Nowadays, it seems like online game. I think the majority of people playing online games are probably playing Call of Duty or Madden. And they're probably playing on consoles. And I don't hate on consoles. I have a PS2 right now, a PS3. I'm thinking about maybe getting a PS4. It just seems like the amount of input and control and the amount that you can actually have an impact on the server that you're playing on has been diminished. And the MMOs are almost kind of like these telltale games where they're trying to give you this illusion that the things that you do in the game, the choices you make in the game, are somehow going to have this wider arching impact when it never actually happens. I remember Guild Wars 2 was advertising like that. You're gonna be able to come in there and make changes and do quests that will change the game world. And I understand there are limitations in MMOs that make it so that you can't, permanently alter things. And that's not really what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is having that guy or that person on a server who's just that infamous person, who's the bad guy, who's leading this group of leading a guild full of pricks that you just want to kill, and you clash with the other guys and they fight over stuff, and you kind of get swept away in this narrative that the players are creating. That doesn't seem to happen in WoW. It doesn't seem like that's going to really happen in Archage. It doesn't seem like it's going to really happen in Guild Wars. It doesn't seem like when I'm PvPing in games anymore, I even notice the name of the person I'm fighting against. And it's kind of like Call of Duty, you know, the guy you're shooting in the head, 99% of the time, you're not going to remember his name. Well, what we've gotten are kind of these muddled, impersonal, generic experiences that are tailored to try to throw a net out and catch the most amount of people possible. Not to necessarily keep them there, but to get them to purchase it, to get them to put some time into it, get their money, and then get out. Now, what would I like to see happen? The Oculus Rift might be an opportunity, some new form of technology, some virtual reality or a headset-based game, MMO, something of that line that is, the first of its kind that a lot of people get into, where you have those populations kind of colliding with each other again, would be pretty cool. I'd like to see... I'd be curious to see what Blizzard does in terms of how they're ever going to make a sequel to WoW. I'm curious to see how this new EverQuest game turns out. I played EverQuest 2 for a while. Wasn't a bad game. Was pretty good. Liked the PvP. I'm curious to see what they do with EverQuest 3. That could be something that grabs my attention for a good amount of time. I know that there's a space game. I think it's called Star Citizen that's coming out that might be pretty cool and might bring some of these elements back. And I'm hopeful. I dig gaming. I'm not jaded towards the hobby, and I still like it. And I'm still excited to play games. I find myself leaning more towards story-based games now, though, than like Beyond Two Souls. I thought that was great, and the Telltale games like Wolf Among Us and Walking Dead. I thought those were great as well. I think games that tell a good story nowadays are kind of filling my entertainment quota, because I'm not really getting that sense of interaction with the community like I used to get in MMOs. Maybe I'm different. Maybe the games are different. Maybe I'm not meeting the right people. But it just seems like in the games now with MMOs, you only talk to people when you need to get something from them. And that's pretty much the interaction that you have with them. And while you could argue that before that was the case, because what you were trying to get was such a over-ending or such a long journey to get it, I guess maybe the relationships that you had with people were longer and became more realistic than what you have now, which seems pretty simplistic and forgettable. So this is probably a long video at this point. It's kind of my introduction to where I come from with gaming, and I don't know if anybody's going to watch this or not. Hopefully some people do. If you do, leave me a comment. Maybe give me some ideas for some games you'd like to see me play, and go from there. If you like the video, favorite it, like it, do all that kind of nifty stuff, and I'll check you guys out later.